Tales from India. 3. 12 years later. He was a young man who had decided to follow the path of inner evolution. He went to a master and asked him, "Guruji, what instruction must I follow to find the truth, to attain the highest wisdom?" The master said to him, "This, young man, is all I can tell you. Everything is the self, pure consciousness. Just as water turns into ice, the self takes on all the forms of the universe. There is nothing except the self. You are the self. Recognize that you are the self, and you will have attained the truth, the highest wisdom." The aspirant was not satisfied. He said, "Is that all? Can you tell me nothing more?" "That is all my teaching," the master said. "I can give you no other instruction." The young man was very disappointed because he expected that the master had given him secret instructions and some very special techniques, even a mysterious mantra. But because he was really a genuine seeker, though still very ignorant, he went to another teacher and asked for mystical instruction. This second teacher said, "I will not hesitate to give it to you, but first you must serve me for 12 years. You will have to work very hard in my ashram, spiritual community. By the way, there is a job now available. It is collecting buffalo dung." For 12 years, the young man worked at this thankless task. Finally, the day came when the time set by the master had been fulfilled. 12 years had passed, 12 years of collecting buffalo dung. He turned to the master and said, "Master, I am not as young as I was. Time has passed. A dozen years have passed. Please give me the instruction now." The master smiled. Slowly and lovingly, he placed one of his hands on the shoulder of the patient disciple, who gave off a rank smell of manure. He declared, "Take good note. My teaching is that everything is the self. It is the self that manifests itself in all the forms of the universe. You are the self." Spiritually mature, the disciple immediately understood the teaching and gained enlightenment. But after a few moments and reacting, he said, "I am puzzled, Master, that you have given me the same teaching as another master I met 12 years ago. Why would that be?" "Simply because the truth does not change in 12 years, but your attitude towards it does. The master says, when you are spiritually prepared, even contemplating a leaf falling from a tree can open you to the truth." The smuggler. Everyone knew he was indisputably a smuggler. He was even notorious for it. But no one had ever managed to discover it, much less prove it. He often crossed from India to Pakistan on the back of his donkey, and the guards, even when they suspected him of smuggling, were unable to obtain any proof of it. Years went by, and the smuggler, now old, retired to live peacefully in a village in India. One day, one of the guards who happened to be passing by met him and said, "I'm no longer a guard and you're no longer a smuggler. I want to ask you a favor. Now tell me, my friend, what were you smuggling?" And the man replied, "Donkeys." The master says, thus the human being, as long as he has not purified his discernment, is unable to see reality. A very special sanctuary. This story, starring Nasruddin, is well known in India and is recounted below. Nasruddin's father was the caretaker of a very famous shrine, which was visited by an extraordinary number of devotees. All kinds of devotees came to worship there. He had become very famous. Over the years, Nasruddin had heard so much talk about spiritual truths that he himself decided to travel and thus gain direct knowledge of them. He said goodbye to his father, who, as a parting gift, gave him a donkey. Satisfied, Nasruddin set out on his journey in search of higher realities. Nasruddin traveled tirelessly, always counting on the faithfulness of his donkey. But one day, the donkey, no longer young, collapsed and died. His tired heart had failed him. Nasruddin sat beside his beloved dead donkey and began to moan painfully. Passers-by took pity on him and kept him company for a while. Some began to put branches and leaves on the donkey's corpse, which was gradually hidden in this way. Others threw stones and mud on the branches, and after a while a shrine had been formed over the dead donkey. Nasruddin remained saddened, and day after day he continued to keep the donkey company. Pilgrims who happened to pass by the place, seeing a man sitting next to a shrine, thought that it must be the shrine of a great spiritual master. So many of them also spent some time near the shrine. They offered fruit and left large sums of money. The news spread, and faithful from the surrounding villages and towns began to make pilgrimages to the shrine. It was already established that it was the shrine of a great enlightened one. So much money did the faithful contribute that finally Nasruddin had a huge mosque built next to the sanctuary, visited by thousands of devotees from all latitudes. Pilgrims, faithful, and even spiritual teachers came. Nasruddin became rich and famous. The fame of his sanctuary grew so much that the news reached his father's ears. He decided to visit his son. They met after years, and both felt a deep joy. "My son," said Nasruddin's father, "you do not know how famous you are. Your shrine has become so famous that it is heard of even in the farthest corners of the country. But my son, tell me something I have wanted to know for a long time. What great enlightened person lies in this shrine that it attracts so many devotees?" "Oh, father," exclaimed Nasruddin, "what I am going to tell you is incredible. You cannot even imagine it, my father. Do you remember the donkey you gave me? Well, that poor animal is buried here." Then Nasruddin's father said, "My son, how strange are the designs of fate. Do you know something? That was also the case with me. The shrine that I guard is also that of a donkey that died on me." The master says, "If you are a victim of superstition and follow the cult blindly, you are more ignorant than the donkey in the shrine." Medicine to cure ecstasy. The divine incarnation of Gauranga had entered into a very deep ecstasy. Absent from everything, he lost his balance and fell into the sea. Some fishermen pulled him out with their nets, and by becoming involved with the divine incarnation, they too entered into ecstasy. Feeling very happy, intoxicated with spiritual joy, they left their work and began to go here and there, reciting the name of God. The relatives, when they noticed that the hours passed and they did not emerge from their mystical trance, began to worry. They then tried to bring them out of the ecstasy, but failed in their attempts. Time passed, and they all remained connected to the cosmic consciousness, absent from everyday reality. Helpless and alarmed, the relatives sought advice from Gauranga himself, who advised them, "Go to the house of a priest, take some rice, put it in the mouths of the fishermen, and I assure you that they will be cured of their ecstasy." The relatives took rice from a priest's house and put it in the fishermen's mouths. The priest's rice immediately brought them out of their ecstasy, and they all returned to their ordinary state of consciousness. The master says, "Many priests are only professionals of religion, without a pure heart or impeccable conduct." The false guru. The monsoon rains had arrived in India. It was a dark day, and it was pouring with rain. A disciple was running for shelter from the rain when his master saw him and rebuked him. "How dare you run away from the divine's bounty? Why do you dare to seek shelter from the heavenly liquid? You are a spiritual aspirant, and as such you should keep in mind that rain is a precious gift for all humanity." The disciple could not help but feel deeply ashamed. He began to walk very slowly, soaking wet, until he finally reached his house. Because of the rain, he caught a persistent cold. Days passed. One morning, the disciple was sitting on the porch of his house reading the scriptures. He looked up for a moment and saw his guru running as fast as his legs would carry him in order to reach some place that would protect him from the rain. "Master," he said, "why do you flee from divine blessings? Are you not now the one who despises the divine gift? Are you not fleeing from the celestial water?" The guru replied, "O ignorant and foolish one, Have you not eyes to see that I do not wish to defile it with my feet? The Master says, those who do not exemplify their words with their actions always find a way to justify themselves. The imperturbability of the Buddha. For many years, the Buddha traveled from town to town and village to village, giving the teaching, always with infinite compassion. But everywhere there were wicked and unscrupulous people. Thus, sometimes people would confront the teacher and insult him sharply. The Buddha never lost his smile and remained imperturbably calm. He remained so calm and peaceful that one day his disciples were amazed and asked him, "Sir, how can you remain so calm when insulted?" The Buddha replied, "They insult me, but I do not take the insult back." The Master says, insults or flattery, may they leave you as imperturbable as the breeze of air to the fir tree. The two frogs. Here was a frog who had always lived in a miserable, narrow well, where he was born, and where he was to die. Another frog who had always lived in the sea passed by. He stumbled and fell into the well. "Where do you come from?" asked the frog in the well. "The sea." "Is the sea big?" "Extraordinarily big, immense." The frog in the well thought for a moment, and then asked, "Is the sea as big as my well?" "How can you compare your well with the sea?" "I tell you that the sea is exceptionally big, enormous." But the frog in the well, beside himself with anger, asserted, "Lies, there can be nothing bigger than my well." "Nothing." "You are a liar, and I will throw you out of here right now." The Master says, this is how the fanatic and narrow-minded man acts. The King's Dreams. There was a monarch in a flourishing and prosperous kingdom in northern India. He was rich and powerful. His father had taught him to be magnanimous and generous, and before he died, he had told him, "My son, anyone can, by fate or chance, have a lot, but the important thing is not to have it, but to know how to give and share it. There is no worse quality than greed. Always be generous. You have a lot, so give a lot to others." For some years after his father's death, the king had been generous and generous. But from one day on, he gradually became miserly, and not only did he not share anything with others, but he even began to deny himself even the basic necessities. He really behaved like a beggar. His personal attendant, who had also been his father's attendant, was so worried that he called for a rishi who lived in a cave high in the Himalayas. "It is incredible," the attendant lamented to the rishi. "He is one of the richest kings, and he behaves like a beggar. We would all be very grateful if you could discover the reason." The attendant asked the king to receive the rishi. The monarch agreed. "Okay, provided that he does not ask me for anything, because I am so poor." The rishi and the monarch locked themselves in one of the chambers of the palace. The king was dressed in rags, dirty and smelly, in contrast to the splendorous palace in which he lived. He even went barefoot and did not even wear any royal ornaments. "I'm broke," the king complained. "But, sir, you are rich and powerful," replied the rishi. "Don't come to me with nonsense," said the king. "You can't get anything out of me, because I have nothing. Even when these rags are ruined, what will I cover my body with?" And the king began to weep without being able to stop himself. Then the rishi closed his eyes, concentrated his mind, and like a point of light, he entered the king's brain. There he saw the dream that the king had night after night. He dreamed that he was a beggar, the most miserable of beggars, and thus, although he was a rich and powerful king, he behaved like a beggar. Over the next few days, he succeeded in teaching the king to control his thoughts and change the attitude of his mind. The monarch was again generous, but he could not get the rishi to accept any gift. The Master says, such is the power of thought. As you think, so you are. Conquer thought, and you have conquered yourself. The Essential and Detail. A man was lost in the desert. He was about to die of thirst when some women came along in a caravan. The man, on the verge of death, cried out for help. When the women approached him and surrounded him, he urgently asked for water. The women began to look at him closely and wondered how the man would want to be served water. Would you prefer it in a glass cup or a mug? In a gold or silver vessel? Perhaps in a jug? They talked and talked, showing interest in the object, but in the meantime the man was dying from the lack of water. The master says, there is an area of ignorance in the human mind that inclines it towards the irrelevant and trivial, clouding the awareness of the real. Deascet and ttep. There was a village where an ascetic and a prostitute lived opposite each other. The ascetic led a life of penance and rigor, barely eating and sleeping in a miserable hut. The woman was frequently visited by men. One day the ascetic rebuked the prostitute. "What kind of life is this, you wicked woman? You are corrupt and you corrupt others. You insult God with your behavior." The woman felt very sad. She really wanted to lead another way of life, but it was very difficult given her circumstances. Although she could not change her way of earning a few coins, she was sad and regretful that she had to resort to prostitution, and every time she was taken by a man, she turned her mind towards the divine. For his part, the ascetic noticed with great displeasure that the woman continued to be visited by all kinds of individuals. He adopted the measure of collecting a pebble for every individual who entered the prostitute's shack. After a while, he had quite a pile of pebbles. He called the prostitute and rebuked her. "Woman, you are terrible. Do you see these pebbles? Each one of them amounts to one of your abominable sins." The woman felt great tribulation. She deeply desired that God would take her away from this way of life, and a few weeks later, death took her. That same day, by the designs of inexorable fate, the ascetic also died, and behold, the woman was led to the regions of sublime light, and the ascetic to those of deep darkness. Seeing where they were taking him, the ascetic protested vigorously and furiously against the injustice that God was committing against him. A messenger of the divine explained to him, "You complain that you are being led to the lower regions despite having spent your life in austerities and penances, and that on the other hand, the woman has been led to the regions of light. But do you not understand that we are what we harvest? Look at the earth. There lies your body, sprinkled with perfume and covered with rose petals, honored by all, courted by musicians and mourners, ready to be cremated with all honors. Instead, look at the body of the prostitute, abandoned to the vultures and jackals, ignored by all and despised by all. Yet she cultivated purity and high ideals for her heart, thinking constantly of God. And you, on the contrary, by looking at sin so often, stained your soul with impurities. Do you understand, then, why each of you goes to such a different region?" The master says, "Watch your attitude. Learn to understand and tolerate. Discern beyond appearances." Where is the 10th man? There were 10 friends. They were all very ignorant. They decided to get together to go on an excursion. They wanted to have a bit of fun and have a nice day in the country. They prepared some food, met at the edge of the village at dawn, and set off on their excursion. They walked happily through the fields, chatting incessantly and laughing loudly. They came to a river, and to cross it, they took a barge that was tied to a tree. They were very happy, joking and splashing in the water. They reached the opposite bank and got off the barge. It was a wonderful day. Once on land, they counted themselves and discovered that there were only 9 of them. But where was the 10th of them? They began to look for the 10th man. They could not find him. They began to worry and mourn his loss. Had he drowned? What had become of him? They tried to calm themselves and counted themselves again. There were only 9 of them. The situation was distressing. One of them had gone missing forever. They began to whimper and complain. Then a vagabond passed by. He saw the men counting each other again. The vagabond quickly discovered what was happening. It turned out that each man forgot to count himself, so he slapped each of them and told them to count themselves again. At that moment, they counted 10 and felt very satisfied and happy. The master says, the 10th man was not a new acquisition. It has always been there, like the self residing within the human being. It has never been absent. As soon as the obfuscation of the mind is dissipated, it will be perceived. Attitude of resignation. This is the story of two sadhus. One of them had been enormously wealthy, and even after he had severed his family and social ties and given up his business, his family took care of him and had several servants to look after him. The other sadhu was very poor, living on public charity, and had only a bowl and an antelope skin on which to meditate. The poor sadhu often boasted of his poverty and criticized and ridiculed the rich sadhu. He used to make the following remark: "It seems that he was too old to continue the family business, so he became a renunciate, but without giving up all his luxuries." The poor sadhu would miss no opportunity to pester the rich sadhu and make fun of him. He would approach him and say, "My renunciation is valuable, but not yours, which is not really renunciation at all, because you are still leading a comfortable and easy life." One day, suddenly, the rich sadhu, when the poor sadhu spoke to him thus, said sharply, "Right now, you and I are going on a pilgrimage to the source of the Ganges, like two wandering sadhus." The poor sadhu was surprised, but in order to maintain his image he had to agree to a pilgrimage, which he really had little desire for. Both sadhus set off. A few moments later, the poor sadhu suddenly stopped and exclaimed in alarm, "My God, I must return quickly." Anxiety was evident on his face. "Why?" asked the rich sadhu. "Because I forgot to take my bowl and antelope skin." Then the rich sadhu said, "You have been mocking my material possessions for so long, and now it turns out that you are much more dependent on your bowl and your skin than I am on all my possessions." The master says, the secret is not to be possessed by what one possesses. It depends on who the order comes from. The king and one of his ministers were conversing amiably. The minister was very interested in spiritual evolution and was assiduously practicing the mantra. They discussed the subject. "Can I choose my own mantra, and will it have the same power as the one given to you by your mentor?" asked the king. "No," the minister asserted. "The mantra given by the guru is more powerful." "Honestly," declared the king, "I see no reason for that at all." Then the minister turned to the chief of the guard and ordered, "Arrest His Majesty." The chief of the guard paid no attention to the order, but the monarch, indignant at such audacity, ordered, "Arrest this man and imprison him." The chief of the guard ordered his men to arrest the minister. He was about to be taken to prison when he said, "Sir, do you realize? It depends on who the order comes from." The master says, "The mantra that an evolved being gives carries part of his spiritual energy." The unbeliever. Despite the ascendancy that the word has over the human mind, many people doubt the effectiveness of the mantra or mystical phoneme to channel mental energy and motivate oneself spiritually. Such is the case of an incredulous character who was listening to a yogi who declared, "I can tell you that the mantra has the power to lead you to the self." The incredulous man protested, "That statement has no foundation. How can the repetition of a word lead us to the self? That is like saying that if we repeated bread, 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 the bread would become real and manifest." The yogi faced the incredulous man and shouted, "Sit down right now, scoundrel." The incredulous man became enraged. His anger was so uncontrolled that he began to tremble, and he shouted furiously, "How dare you speak to me in such a manner? And you call yourself a holy man and go around insulting others." Then, with much affection and tenderness, the yogi said to him, "I am very sorry to have offended you. Forgive me. But tell me, what do you feel at this moment?" "I feel offended." And the yogi declared, A single insulting word has made you feel bad. Look at the enormous effect it has had on you. If this is so, why should not the word that designates the being have the power to transform you? The Master says, subject the teaching to experience. The methods are instruments to attain inner liberation. The clay pot. He was a wealthy milkman who had several workers in his dairy. He called one of them, Ashok, and gave him a pot full of butter to take to a customer in a nearby village. In return, he promised him a few extra rupees. Ashok, overjoyed, placed the pot on his head and set off, saying to himself, I am going to earn 2 rupees. Great, I'll buy chickens with them, and soon they'll multiply, and I'll have 10,000 of them. Then I'll sell them and buy goats. They'll breed, and I'll sell some of them and buy a farm. Since I'll make a lot of money, I'll also buy fabrics and become a merchant. That'll be great. I'll get married, have a superb house, and of course I'll have an excellent cook to prepare the most delicious dishes for me. And if one day he doesn't cook well, I'll slap him. Thinking of slapping the cook, Ashok automatically raised his hand, causing the pot to fall, smashing the contents to the ground. Devastated, he returned to the village and confronted the master, who exclaimed, You fool! You have made me lose a week's earnings. Ashok replied, And I have lost my lifetime earnings. The master says, The future is a mirage. This is your moment, your instant. Instead of fantasizing with your mind, set the conditions for the seed to germinate. Discover more stories from India on our Planet Alibro channel.